to be talking about the dural venous sinuses. The dural venous sinuses are sinuses that drain blood from the cerebral vein and also drain CSF. They drain CSF from the subarachnoid space into the internal jugular vein. So they drain blood from cerebral veins and also they drain CSF from the subarachnoid space into the internal jugular vein. The internal jugular vein. Now, it is important to know that the dural sinuses are actually located they are located in between the perosteal layer, or what we call the endosteal layer, and the meningeal layer of the dural matter. Now, let me draw a diagram. Now, this is the skull bone. This is the skull bone. Now, it is important to know that the meninges consist of the dural matter, the arachnoid matter, and the pia matter. Now, the dural matter actually lines the skull bone. But then it is important to know that the dural matter has two layers. One of the layers is known as the endosteal layer, or what we refer to as the perosteal layer. I think I mentioned that in my last video. And then the second layer is referred to as the meningeal layer. Now, at some point, the endosteal layer and the meningeal layer separates to form what is referred to as the dural venous sinuses. Dural venous sinus. Now, also, the dural matter is thrown into what is called as the dural septum. So this is the dural venous sinus. This is the dural septum. Dural septum. Now, apart from this layer, we have another meningeal layer that is below the dural matter. And that layer is actually called the arachnoid matter. The arachnoid matter. The arachnoid matter is actually, like I said in our last video, the arachnoid matter has lots of trabecula. It has lots of trabecula that attaches to another layer which is called the pia mater. So this is our pia mater. This is our pia mater. Okay, let me also draw some of the gyres. Let me draw some of the gyres of the brain. So that we can appreciate it better. So, like I said, the first layer is actually known as the dural matter. It extends down. The second layer is known as the arachnoid matter. It is known as the arachnoid matter. And like I said, the arachnoid matter is highly trabeculated. There's lots of trabecula that layer which is known as the pia mater. The pia mater. And like I mentioned in my previous video, that the pia mater is actually a very soft matter or a soft layer that has lots of blood vessels. It's delicate and of course it has lots of blood vessels. Now there is a space that is below the arachnoid matter. That space is actually called the subarachnoid space. So this is our dura mater. This is arachnoid mater. This is the subarachnoid space. And then this is known as the pia mater. So there is a space that is below the arachnoid mater. That space is actually called the subarachnoid space. And in the subarachnoid space, we have what we call the CSF. The CSF is known as the cerebrospinal fluid. The cerebrospinal fluid. Now, CSF is actually drained into the dural venous sinuses by what is referred to as the arachnoid villi. We have lots of arachnoid villi that actually herniates into the dural venous sinuses. Now, these arachnoid villi, they come together or aggregate to form what is referred to as the arachnoid granulations. The function of the arachnoid granulation is to filter the CSF into the circulation, right? It filters the CSF into the dural venous sinuses, and then of course it goes into the circulation. And also it is important to know that we have cerebral veins in the subarachnoid space that actually drains into the dural venous sinuses. Now this is known as the arachnoid granulation, and then this is known as arachnoid villi. So it is important to know that the dural sinuses are actually located in between the meningeal layer of the dural mater and the endosteal layer of the dural mater. But then there are exceptions because the inferior sagittal sinus is only covered by the meningeal layer of the dural mater. Now, when we talk about the dural venous sinuses, we can actually categorize them into sinuses that lies in the midline, sinuses that lies laterally, sinuses that are located posteriorly, and then sinuses that are located anteriorly. You can also classify them into paired and unpaired sinuses. But then let's stick with this. Now let's mention the dural venous sinuses. Now the first one that I will talk about is the superior sagittal sinus. The superior sagittal sinus is actually the largest dural venous sinus, and of course it extends from the foramen secum and go through the superior border of the falx cerebri, and then it terminates around the internal occipital protuberance. The next one is actually known as the inferior sagittal sinus. The inferior sagittal sinus runs along the inferior border of the falx cerebri, and then it drains into the straight sinus. Also, we have the transverse sinus. We have the left transverse sinus and also the right transverse sinus. Now, the transverse sinus becomes the sigmoid sinus, which eventually drains into the internal jugular vein. The same thing is applicable here. The left transverse sinus becomes the sigmoid sinus and then drains into the internal jugular vein. Now, we also have what is referred to as the superior petrosal sinus and the inferior petrosal sinus. The superior and inferior petrosal sinus are actually located around the petrous part of the temporal bone. And of course, the superior and inferior petrosal sinus drains another sinus that is referred to as the cavernous sinus. So the same thing is applicable here. We have a superior petrosal sinus and the inferior petrosal sinus that eventually forms the cavernous sinus. Now, there is another sinus that connects the two cavernous sinus, which are known as the anterior and the posterior intercavernous sinus. The anterior and the posterior intercavernous sinus. We have another one here that is referred to as the basilar plexus. The basilar plexus. The basilar plexus actually connects adjacent structures. Like it actually connects the cavernous sinus and also have connection with the superior petrosal sinus and the inferior petrosal sinus. The same thing that is applicable here. It connects with the superior petrosal sinus and the inferior petrosal sinus on the right side. And also we also have the sphenoparietal sinus. We have another one here, sphenoparietal sinus. So you can see that the first one we have is known as the superior sagittal sinus that extends from the foramen cecum and then it goes through the upper border or the fixed border of the vas cerebri and then terminates around the internal occipital protuberance. And of course, it also terminates in what we call the confluence of sinuses. And then we also have the inferior sagittal sinus. The inferior sagittal sinus runs along the lower border of the vas cerebri and becomes the straight sinus. The straight sinus actually drains what is called the great cerebral vein. The great cerebral vein. And of course, the great cerebral vein drains the basal vein. The basal vein also drains the anterior cerebral veins. Now, the straight sinus also terminates in the confluence of sinuses. Then, we also have another one called the occipital sinus. The occipital sinus actually drains into the confluence of sinuses. And then, of course, we have the transverse sinuses. This is the occipital sinus. The occipital sinus is actually the smallest sinus. And then, we have the transverse sinus. This is the left transverse sinus. And then this is the right transverse sinus. And then the transverse sinus eventually becomes the sigmoid sinus. The sigmoid sinus is air-shaped in nature and drains into what is called the internal jugular vein. Internal jugular vein. Now, this is our superior petrosal sinus and the inferior petrosal sinus. both of which drains the cavernous sinus into the internal jugular vein or into the sigmoid sinus. Anteriorly, we have the anterior and the posterior intercavernous sinus that connects the two cavernous sinuses. And then we also have the basilar plexus that connects adjacent structures like the cavernous sinus and the superior and inferior petrosal sinuses. And also, it connects with the vertebral vein. Vertebral vein. So it is very important to know that the superior sagittal sinus actually joins with the right. It joins with the right transverse sinus. The right transverse sinus eventually becomes the sigmoid vein. It becomes the sigmoid sinus that eventually drains into the internal jugular vein. The inferior, let me write it this way. The superior sagittal sinus joins with the right transverse sinus. The right transverse sinus eventually becomes the sigmoid sinus that eventually drains into the transverse, that eventually drains into the internal jugular vein. Now, the inferior sagittal sinus drains into the straight sinus, and then the straight sinus drains into the left transverse sinus, which of course drains into the sigmoid sinus, and then drains into the internal jugular vein. Another important thing I would like to talk about is the confluence of sinuses. The confluence of sinuses consists of the superior sagittal sinus, the straight sinus, the transverse sinus, and also it consists of the occipital sinus. So the confluence of sinuses consists of the superior sagittal sinus, the straight sinus, the transverse sinus, and the occipital sinus. The superior sagittal sinus drains into the transverse sinus, and of course, the inferior sagittal sinus becomes the straight sinus, and of course, we also have the occipital sinus. So this area is referred to as the confluence of sinuses. And as you can see, the confluence of sinuses consists of the superior sagittal sinus, the right and the left transverse sinus, and of course, the straight sinus, and the occipital sinus. So now let us categorize our sinuses into sinuses that lie in the midline, those that lie anteriorly, those that lies laterally and those that lies posteriorly. So for the sinuses that actually lies in the midline, they are number one, we have the superior sagittal sinus. Number two, we have the inferior sagittal sinus. Number three, we have the straight sinus. Number four, we have the anterior and the posterior intercavernous sinus. And number five, we have the basilar plexus. Now, the one that lies laterally, are number one, the transverse sinuses. Number two, we have the sigmoid sinuses. Number three, we have the superior petrosal sinus. Number four, we have the inferior petrosal sinus. Now, the one that lies posteriorly are number one, the occipital sinus and the confluence of sinuses. Now, those that lies anteriorly are the cavernous sinus and the sphenoparietal sinus. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you in our next class. Thank you.